Hey, good morning, everyone. We're going to get ready. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes, but we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to put your name and where you're joining from in the chat, that'd be great. I see someone from St. Louis. Cool. New Jersey, nice. Michigan. Miami, love that. All right, we're gonna give it like 2 more minutes. Atlanta. Thank y'all for joining this afternoon. Canada, New York, cool. Washington, San Francisco. Okay, Toby, you can go ahead and kick it off. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as they come.
Sounds good. Well, good afternoon or morning or evening, I guess, if y'all are coming from internationally. But my name is Toby Ogwumike. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Chezi. We are really excited to have Nneka Ogwumike on for a conversation about race and gender equality and just kind of social activism today. I'll start with a quick kind of introduction on us, and then we'll just move right into the chat. So maybe my sister and I, we actually launched Chezi in June of 2020. We are first generation Nigerian immigrants, so Chezi is the Igbo word for reflect. We just believe that companies need to do some self-reflection, some internal reflection, and kind of figure out if the work that they're doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, is actually having the impact that they want it to have. We've kind of gone through a couple iterations of our company, but most recently we have really identified a niche and an opportunity for us with employee resource groups, basically giving companies a way to manage and track the impact of the groups and the outcomes that are coming from them. So happy to talk to anyone on the call or do a demo for anyone that's interested. But with that being said, we can jump right in. So again, we have Nneka Ogwumike of the Los Angeles Sparks on today. I'll read a quick bio, and you had a very long Wikipedia page, so I tried to summarize it as best I can and make it like 3 sentences. But so Nneka is a star forward for the Los Angeles Sparks. She's a 6-time WNBA All-Star, an MVP, and a WNBA champion. She is also the president of the Players Association, and she was recently re-elected for a second term in 2019. Nneka is a Stanford grad, and she hails from Nigeria, but grew up in Cypress, Texas, I believe. So Nneka, I think you might be muted because we tried to, no, okay, you're off mute now. You can just, well, it's great to have you, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always wonderful sharing a space with like-minded people in the diaspora. So it's always something that's been very, very important to me. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that bio kind of sums it all up. I'm currently entering my 11th season with the LA Sparks. I've been in California for a while. So I'm almost a native at this point of both California and Texas, as I went to school in California as well. Yeah. But I'm really happy to be here speaking with you guys, and I'm excited for what Chezi has to offer society.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's jump right in. I think we were really excited to talk to you because we're all thinking, everyone I think on this call is cognizant of the events of the summer of 2020, and I think a lot of sports got a lot of focus because we were all inside, and when sports leagues came back, it was just a great attention grabber. And if you kind of paid attention to the NBA and the WNBA in particular, you saw what was happening in the bubble and people putting um, themes or phrases on their jerseys and protesting and things like that. And it seemed like the NBA got a lot of credit for that. When in reality, we, maybe and I have kind of been paying attention, and we knew that the WNBA Players in the league was the one that kind of led the charge on it. And so we just wanted to start with the question about, can you walk us through your thought process for some of the things that WNBA was doing for civil rights, especially in that, that summer 2020 time?
Yeah, I mean, like it was a lot. I would even say that it didn't even start with, t-shirts being made and sitting out of games. It started way before that, as the pandemic was making its way over to the Western Hemisphere, we were faced with trying to figure out exactly what our season would look like, in a lot of ways, it was kind of a blessing in disguise because we didn't have to abruptly stop our season and then reinvent it. We really had to build it from scratch. So we were kind of primed because we had just signed a monumental collective bargaining agreement that January. So we were already in the zone of negotiating. And once the pandemic came and everyone had to stay at home, but we also wanted to ensure that we still had a season, we had to figure out what that was going to look like. So a lot of that had to do with us figuring out, okay, are we going to play in a bubble? Is it going to look like a bubble? What does it mean for us, women of sport with less resources? Are we going to get 100% of our pay in a time where resources are being allocated to accommodate a season so that, no one catches or spreads the virus? All in the middle of everyone being at home and watching another civil rights, I guess, like, I don't want to call it an uprising because I feel like it's always there, but there's always a pulse to it, especially for those who are not living it and who are not directly exposed. So we had to understand what that meant for us too, whether we felt like our voices could be heard when we were all confined to one location playing a seasons. And I'm not gonna lie, like we figured it out along the way. We didn't have it totally figured out before we got to the bubble. We didn't have it figured out when we were doing it. There was a lot of situation room, touch and go, emergency meeting situations, not just for us using our platforms and our voices to bring light to what was going on, in society, but also because we were in a pandemic through which was also exacerbating a host of disparities that just continue to permeate our country. So I would say that it's even still evolving. Our role in it is still evolving, but it's by no means our first time. That summer 2020 was not our first time, and we just want to be better and hopefully inspire other leagues and teams to lead by example.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think something that I touched on when I first asked this question was that the NBA was like kind of at the forefront of it, at least according to media, but the WNBA was like the behind the scenes actually leading the charge. And, I don't want to go as far as to ask like why you think that was, because that's probably pretty obvious. But I guess the argument could be made that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as like, advancements are made and people are becoming more aware. But at the same time, it does really speak to allyship, right? And the media and the NBA itself and NBA players and things like that, making sure to give their credit to the women of the WNBA that kind of led the charge. So kind of wrapping that up, in the fight for, in the activism and the fight for racial justice and things like that, what does allyship look like to you?
I mean, I think, there's always these kind of like spotlight words that are used when we experience things in history. And, of course, after 2020, there was a lot of allyship. There was a lot of, especially in the business world, diversity, equality and inclusion, or equity and inclusion. So it's interesting when you actually look at these words and terms and you have to figure out exactly what does it mean, not what does it look like, but what does it mean, and I guess after really kind of being in front of it all, facing it all, learning from so many different luminaries in their field, especially as it pertains to politics, business, and civil rights, and society. I think allyship really, it's just making space, honestly. I think it's just making space and understanding when it's your time to listen. Because I think a lot of people jump the gun when it comes to being an ally because they think they know how to help, or they think that action is literal, you know. You can help by not doing anything and just listening to the person that
Yeah.
does not always have the space. So that's what I feel like allyship is. And we are all privileged in our own ways, you know. Granted, as you said, sometimes people care about where the credit goes. The W, we really don't care about where it goes. We just want to make change and hopefully inspire other people to do more for others than just their immediate selves. And with that, you just need people to listen to you. That's really that's really what it is. And as president of the WNBP, I learned that very quickly, not just from 2020, but from negotiating the collective bargaining agreement, because for it to reflect the needs of every player, I had to figure out what the players wanted, and everyone's experience is different. But one thing about, I guess, displaying or practicing allyship is you will realize that when you make space for those who have not always been afforded that space, our experiences, yeah.
Oh, I can't tell if it's frozen for just me or.
Focal point, that the similarities are really.
Hey, Nneka, it looks like you are kind of spotty.
Okay, it's not just.
Okay, I think
Can you
she's
hear
back.
us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. You started freezing at, you were dropping a great bar just around allyship. I think the last thing that I heard was that it's not just about action.
Yeah.
So sorry if you want to just kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, I mean it's not so literal. I think people think that when you have to help or support or be an ally in this case, that it has to be something big and
Yeah.
something that is felt, and you don't have to do something big. Sometimes you just need to listen to a person, listen to their experience, hear them out, especially those who are not usually afforded that space and time. And in a lot of ways, I think there's a connotation around allyship that is focused on more, and probably necessarily because for so long differences have been so averse to how society functions, and those differences can be certainly celebrated. I mean, that's what's creating movements for support and allyship. But I think that when you really display allyship and ultimately leadership by listening and hearing people out, you'll realize that we all have a lot of similarities that could
Yeah.
actually really contribute to the progress. It's not just about everything being so different and so different for everyone, that makes it feel like forward progress it has so many obstacles. There's a lot of similarities that we can tap into just by creating that space for others. That'll really make things a lot smoother when we are trying to figure out exactly where we want to go, especially as it pertains to equity and equality.
Makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask about this later, but you just kind of touched on it, so it's a good segue. You just mentioned kind of your role as the president of the Players Association and how you kind of had to speak with different players to kind of figure out what the through line was in terms of what people were wanting to get out of this new collective bargaining agreement. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your role and kind of why you wanted to take this on? Because it is obviously a pretty big uptaking, and you're doing a lot on and off the court already.
Yeah, well, I mean, like honestly, I didn't want the job. I don't. I think I was I was actually recommended by the previous president. I had already been on the executive committee and a player representative for my team for several years. It's just a job that I guess in the league and especially in sports, you know, it's not a job people necessarily want, but it's
Yeah.
also a job that you assume that same person is going to have forever. But the last president was about to retire, and so she took it upon herself to say, hey, you know what, you should probably run for president. And I'm not gonna lie, I told her, I was like, yeah, no, that's, I see what you do. That's not something I want to do. Because there's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And for me, I also didn't necessarily feel like I had enough enough connection with the players for me to serve as president, because you really have to get to know everybody. I mean, these are people you're playing against.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably been the most favorite part of my role, is getting to know the players outside of just them being an opponent on the court. So with that, I grew to love the role. I can't see myself not doing it now.
Mm.
But I think that's a part of the growth. It's a part of understanding, one, that there are things for you that you may not think you're ready for, that that end up actually kind of fitting into your niche. But then also, it takes it takes empowerment to show that type of leadership. There's a lot of power and empowerment. And so Tamika, who recommended that I do the job, was like, hey, you should try it. And I think I'm still proven right, because I've run unopposed twice. So we'll see if I'm making this job a little bit more satiable for other players, because I'm not going to play forever either, and I don't want to have to nominate someone to run. I would like to see a competitive election in the next few years, and I'm hoping that my work and my legacy as president does just that. And I'm really happy that I've gotten to get to know the players on an individual level.
I don't know, just to go a little off script, you kind of just talked about how you were, I don't want to say thrust into this role, but you were given the role more or less, and how you kind of had to overcome a sense that maybe you weren't like fully prepared or like the best fit for the job. Can you just talk about how you worked through that or overcame that feeling that maybe it wasn't necessarily for you?
Yeah. I always like to preface any of my anecdotal experience with the fact that it's very unique to me. But of course, we learn from each other by sharing our stories. There's so much value in sharing your story, because you never know who can also relate to it, or who can't and learn something new. So for me, whether it's being president, whether it's playing with the Sparks, or in any other capacity, with the hats that I wear in my life, a lot of it has been about who I'm surrounded with and what they see in me that I do not yet see. I have a habit, and I think that this is I don't want to say unique, but it's prevalent to not just people of color, but especially women of color. Imposter syndrome, boxing yourself in, living in complacency. And a lot of that, I think, stems from security, from knowing what you know, and knowing what it gives, and knowing what you're going to get. And I've had a habit of doing that as a young woman, as a professional athlete, as a businesswoman. And gratefully, I've surrounded myself with visionaries, with people in my life who see more in me than maybe I do in myself at the time. Sometimes it takes someone to open the door for you to walk through and really see what's in the room that has your name on it. And so overcoming that confidence, I wouldn't ever say that I've mastered it.
Yeah.
I think there's always levels. There's levels to everything, And, I've realized now, like in life, there's moments when I feel, I don't want to say necessarily like I'm plateauing in something, but you can coast, it just like in practice. Like I can work on a move, work on a move, work on a move. And then after a while, it's like second nature. I can do it without any question, But then what happens when people also now attune to that move? Do I have a counter? And so working on that counter move can feel scary because something that's worked for so long, but I can have a coach that can expose me to, hey, you can work on this counter. And so now once you work on the counter, every once in a while, I can go back to my same move because now people don't really know which way I'm going to go. So I use that analogy to say that it's not something you do on your own. It's not. And there's so much necessity in community. And there's a lot, I can't stress this enough. Asking for help is sexy. It's not bad to ask for help. It's something that I think we've been groomed not to do. Especially.
How do you mean?
I mean, like people of color, women of color.
Right.
You always have to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And in a world that was not designed for us, asking for help is very, very vulnerable because we step into the unknown of the authenticity of who's going to guide us. But you can find your community, you can find the people that will help you, and that'll break you out of the box that oftentimes we put on ourselves.
I love that. We have a bunch of definitely a bunch of sound bites to take from that last question. That was really good. I guess transitioning now, one of our questions that we want to ask you about was just around the idea of intersectionality. You kind of just touched on, your experiences as a Black person, but also a woman, but also a Black woman, like that kind of compounding on top of itself. But can you just talk a little bit more about how your intersectional identity has impacted your career? And if it's and some things that maybe like you might be aware of, but also things that I think when the intersectionality component comes in, it's like there's some things you're not even aware of, like, but some disadvantages that you might be facing or some advantages that you might be facing that you're not even cognizant of because they're not right in front of you, right? The conversation's happening behind closed doors and stuff like that. So, like how has being a Black woman specifically impacted your professional career?
Yeah, so, the way that I was raised, Nigerians are always raised to be the best. It doesn't matter what color, creed, or background, whoever is your competition is anyone that's doing better than you. It doesn't matter what they look like. And so I didn't really grow up with the lens of, I'm being treated differently or I don't deserve what this person is getting. I think through my own personal experience, I would notice how I would get treated compared to other kids, other young women, and also the standards that were put on me, and in that way, there's less room for us to mess up. There's less room for us to mess up. And that intersectionality has just been like my knowledge of my own intersectionality has been evolving so much. For the longest, I was always seen as the athletic one, she's athletic. There's nothing else that would really describe me. But then ultimately, I kind of, I guess you could say, I created more lines in my intersectionality, not just by what I'm being defined by, I'm like, if I can be athletic, all right, cool. Like, yeah, but I'm also a student of the game. I have a very high basketball IQ, and that's not something that they would normally define Black athletes with. It's usually just skill and athleticism. So I didn't necessarily use that as motivation, but I also wanted to be the best. And so constantly comparing myself to other people was something that it just didn't make sense to me. I always knew that what I was putting in has to be the absolute best of what I know that I can do. And then how that is displayed to the world, that's up for interpretation. But as long as I can go home and say, I gave 100% of what I could give today. And I think that's another thing that this conversation can go in so many different ways. But when it comes to the intersectionality, for people with different backgrounds, people, different ways of life, you have less room to mess up but then also you're expected to give the very best of the little that is afforded to you, of the little piece that is afforded to you. And so that weighs a lot on. Now, if we kind of talk about the mental health aspect of it all, we're not expected to mess up, and there's no room for us to be emotional. There's no room for us to feel. And that leads to the burden that especially people of color experience in this society that was not groomed for them to succeed. So as I've gotten older, I've even realized that, speaking out was something that was not necessarily celebrated as an athlete, especially as a woman that's an athlete. You're just supposed to be very grateful for what is given to you. You should be happy that there's basketball for you, as opposed to asking for equitable treatment. So when I started hearing these things, I just realized, I was like, man, I was blessed to be raised in a situation where most times, the girls basketball or the women's basketball program was the best program where I was at. So for me to now feel as though my experience was taking steps back just didn't make sense to me. And I think that I found my voice in being president. But like you said, there's a lot that we don't realize when it comes to our intersectionality. As I got into the league, I really did realize, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm a Black woman in sport. But then also too, I'm a Nigerian Black woman in sport. And there comes the experiences of people always mispronouncing my name, people not even trying to say my name. Like there's always a layer to the intersectionality, which kind of exposes us to the different privileged experiences that we do have. And I think it's something that we have to make sure like it doesn't overcome us in a way where we feel like we always have to be perfect. But then also we can set our own expectations based on what we identify with and not what others label us to be. And it's been such a great journey. I really do love, learning more about myself in this way and ultimately learning more about other people. And I think it's so wonderful. And I mean, also too, like intersectionality helps because I'm sure there's people on this call who have never watched a WNBA game. I'm sure there's Nigerians on this call. Maybe other Ivy League students on this call, like intersectionality is so beautiful. And that's why I think that's what I mean when I say our differences expose us to the similarities that we have. And that's something that we can't forget.
No, that's really good. I was laughing at the you saying like in every other, I guess, basketball situation you've been in, like the women's team has been like the best team. Basically, that's how it was for maybe and I in high school. Like their team was like state runner up, Final Four, all this stuff, and our men's team was mid. Our men's team was average. But I guess that kind of segments into my next question around the NBA WNBA relationship, right? And I think something that is always in the news, and this isn't even just specific to basketball, because we hear about it a lot with the U.S. women's national team, the soccer team, versus the men's team, right? And how it's mainly around the pay disparity and just how I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think for the NBA, it's 50-50. And then for the WNBA, it's been a battle to get it just to that same number. And there's obviously a bunch of people that are going to say, when you bring this up, like, of course, women get paid less than men because like the women's league draws in less attention. So like, there's not as much money to go around, but the whole fight, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the whole fight is about getting to the same ratio, right? Can you just talk to me a little bit more, or talk to us a little bit more about like the debate around the NBA versus WNBA pay disparity, and just your general views on that conversation, because I'm sure it's part of your role as president of the Players Association.
Yeah, I mean, like, this debate, it can go any which way.
Right.
And right now, equality is not necessarily, equality is the goal, but the way to get there is through equity. Equity is what we need. We need equitable treatment for the resources that we do have. And then that will build up to, an equal experience compensation for the NBA and the WNBA. But a lot of times, I've talked about this so many times, and the only way that I can really make it make sense for anyone is to compare the ages of our league. The NBA turned 75 this year. We are 26. Yeah.
You also made the top 25 WNBA players list. I forgot to mention that in the bio.
Oh yeah, no worries.
I'm just going to drop that gem in here.
But we're 26.
Yeah.
They're 75. So if you're thinking about a 26-year-old and their wealth compared, if all things being equal, and a 75-year-old and their wealth, there, I'm sure the argument would change. Oh, well, that person has so many more years ahead of them, they're just building. So that's always kind of what I break it down to. And it's difficult for people to understand that because we live in a modern world now where accessibility to information and history can kind of thwart our expectations of where things need to be. And I guess when it comes to talking about the NBA compared to the WNBA, you always have to have that fact in mind. However, the goal of equitable treatment does not have to take another 50 years, because we are advancing in a way in which resources can be used more equitably than the NBA when they were 26. And so that's kind of my main argument. Outside of any data, you just have to understand that the ages of our leagues are very different. But the societal movements, of course, feel as though they're way ahead of the organizations and the business that's been in place, which is great because then we can figure out how to do things faster.
Right.
But you just have to have that perspective in mind. Yeah.
So how do you go about, because that was, I definitely just learned something from that last response, and I'm sure there are other people on this call that did it as well. How do you go about educating people on this topic? And not even just on the WNBA, NBA pay disparity, but like on the greater conversation about race in society, right? Because I feel like I know a lot of for the Black people on this call or the people of color on this call, like summer 2020, I personally felt like I had to do a lot of like educating on like what books to read, what shows to watch, right? What podcasts to listen to, like what you should know, what you shouldn't do, what you should say versus should not say. Right. And it's like, it's a burden, but at the same time, sometimes it feels like if I don't do it, right? And I'm sure a lot of people of color would kind of relate to this. If we don't do it, then who's going to do it?
Yeah.
So how do you kind of approach that topic around just like educating people about, in this case, the WNBA, NBA pay disparity, but also just generally like race issues in society and your experiences as a Black woman?
Yeah, I think in 2020, a lot of people got slapped in the face with like what they were what they were doing in their lives, and when something so monumental like that or historical like that happens, especially as a conscious person wanting to contribute to society, you feel like you have to do so much. And this is kind of where we circle back to when I was talking about like allyship and action. It doesn't have to be so big. It doesn't have to be so literal. So when I educate people, say using the WNBA as an example about, this is what we're fighting for. This is who we represent. These are the people that are in our league. It's easy. Put on a game. Look up the players.
Yep.
Go to a game.
Right.
You don't have to like read my Wikipedia page and then like, oh yes, I know her now. Like, no. You can follow someone even and let it relate in whatever way. If you have a player that's from your hometown, if you have a player that went to your school, if there's your favorite player in your city that you live in, the city that you grew up in, those little things are easy to do. It's kind of like a gateway into the world to expose you to something that you're trying to learn more about, especially an organization or a group of people that represent where you want to go or what you want to be a part of. And that extends, I'm just using the WA as an example. That extends, like you said, so all different aspects of our lives. So, you were saying that you had to come to terms with like, hey, am I reading the right books? Am I watching the right podcasts? Like, even outside of that, like, if you wanted to read a book, you could even say, hey, let me find a group of people that are going to read this book and let's talk about how it makes us feel. That discussion can be more than what you would read in the book.
Yeah.
And in those moments, you might be able to expose your experience to someone who represents the dominant experience of our country. Even if it's just going out and reaching out to someone that you don't necessarily hang out with a lot, and taking them taking them to some type of exposition where you guys can learn something, like it's doing everyday things, but at a more conscious level. And I like to bring this back. So I was an intern at Deloitte for like an off season, and I worked in the DEI kind of sector. And so everyone, the most questions I would get were always around how can we be better with DEI, like in the workplace. And my answer was, if you're not doing it at home, it doesn't matter what you do at work.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do at work has to be reflected in your everyday life. You can't be a co-founder of Chezi and then not be reflecting in your everyday, you know what I'm saying? Not be reflecting in your everyday life. You have to live what you believe, especially if it has to do with the business that you're about. So you can draw up strategies, you can throw money at anything, donate to whatever charities and foundations, but that's not going to matter if I'm going home to the same group of people every day, if I'm not exposing myself to new people every day. So that's why I feel like the answer to that is just immerse yourself. Like immerse yourself in the best way that you know how, and don't do it by yourself. Immerse with community. And I think that makes the biggest difference when we're really trying to create change, because I could draw up a plan and give you a deck about what you got to do. But if you don't believe and understand what is in the deck, it's going to be hard to execute.
Yeah.
As a player, as a teammate, the coach can draw up a play, but if we don't buy into the play he's drawing up, we're going to screw it up when we go out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to really buy into it and immerse yourself, and not feel as though you have to study so much for the presentation of like a dissertation on something.
Right.
You just have to live it. I think that's the easiest way too.
So we kind of just talked about the multiple hats that you wear as like a player, president, students, everything else, right? And I think this is one of Damavi's favorite questions to ask, is just with everything that you have to do and all the responsibilities that you have, how do you kind of take care of your mental, right? Like, how do you take time for yourself? How do you protect your peace and your mental health?
Yeah, no, this is huge. And, it's so funny because of the role that I hold and me having opportunities to get to speak with people like you and organizations like Chezi, I get these types of questions a lot. And I think that one thing, there's always these headliner or tag words that people use, self-care, all this, and like when people hear that, they think, oh, take a bubble bath,
Yes.
and we can't commercialize these things because our issue is that things get commercialized before we can really implement them in our lives, or before we can really reflect on what we were pushing away or what we were avoiding just for survival for so long. So yeah, mental health is huge, and it is a really big buzzword right now, but it's been such an issue for so long, especially in the communities with people of color, because survival has always reigned supreme. And so mental health always took a back seat. And we're realizing that generational trauma is affecting those things in people who are trying to make big differences today. So for me, it's small things. Yeah, okay, I love to read and I love to listen. Like, I'm a huge podcast nerd. Like, I love to listen to podcasts. But like something as simple as drawing boundaries, and not just drawing boundaries on other people, but drawing boundaries on myself. I learned this quickly in the pandemic because we had to work out from home for about 3 months before we went. So when I first started working out, I was like, oh my God, like I've never had this opportunity where I could just be at home, nowhere to go. I can just do whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to wake up when I want to. I'm going to work out. And it just, the structure, and the lack thereof was just too overwhelming for me. It was too overwhelming. I was waking up, I was eating breakfast at like 2 because I would just sleep whenever I wanted. And it was just so out of whack. And so I learned that I had to put boundaries on myself. So I have a very regimented like evening routine and morning routine. Whatever that is, it has to work for you. Yeah. But I don't compromise on when I go to sleep. I don't compromise on when I wake up, what I do when I wake up. I don't flip open my phone right away. I ensure that what I'm doing at my nighttime routine is nourishing me for the next day. Nighttime is not about resting. For me, now my time's not about necessarily resting from what you did during that day. It's about prepping for what you need to do the next day. And so that's my own personal boundary that I had to put on myself. And then also too, I had to put boundaries on the amount of work that I do, because I have, I guess you could say, an unconventional occupation where I don't necessarily have set hours, but I do have to work out every day. So nothing interferes with that time. You know, I set aside that time for me to work out and for me to achieve what I need to achieve in that time, whether I'm in season or out of season. But then also too, I'm not taking calls at 9 p.m. There's a cutoff. There's a cutoff, you know, and I had to set boundaries on myself and for myself to ensure that that structure nourishes what I think is the highest form of self-love, which is discipline for me. Because if you can be disciplined in creating space for yourself, then, you know, outside variables are going to be very difficult to penetrate your world and environment that makes you the best you. So that's kind of, there's a lot of stuff I do in my nighttime, my daytime routine, but the boundaries was probably the most important part for me.
Love that. Okay. This will be the last question before we open it up to Q&A. We've kind of gone through, we didn't even go through much of like your high school into college, into WNBA journey, but it's winding, right? And you've kind of done a lot to get to where you are today. But if there was one maybe like piece of advice that you have for somebody who's earlier in the career trying to get to a point of success like you've gotten to, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say the best piece of advice I could give them is that how you get to where you want to go is up to how you want to do it, not how it looks as though someone else did it. You know, like I know that's very wordy, but your path is your path.
Yeah.
You know, you can always end up in the same destination as many other people who are aspiring to do the same thing or similar things, but how you get there is up to you. You're not following someone to that path. And I think that it's very important for people to understand, especially in this world of social media, what it looks like is not what it is. And so you need to ensure that how you want it done is what it looks like to you, not to them. Yeah. And I think we have a generation of people that understand that very much. And it's really exciting to see individuals do just that. I mean, just like Chezzy, like you're doing it your way. And you have to know what you won't compromise on. I think that's very important. There's things that make up your morals and your values and your foundation that contribute to that path towards your goal, and you have to know what you will not compromise on, because in today's world there's the fast lane, but that a lot of times, you know, it sacrifices things that you value.
Yes.
You have to really have the foundation of what you will not compromise to get to where you want to go, knowing that that's your path.
Awesome. Okay, we'll open it up to Q&A now. So maybe I know you had a question that you wanted to ask, so you can go ahead and come up mute, and then I can read through the rest of the ones in the chat.
Okay, cool. Nneka, I just want to say you did drop some gems. I was like clapping in the background. But I did have a question. So we know that most corporate environments are mostly dominated by white men. And the WNBA is kind of like completely opposite of that. You know, it's a league made up of women, most of whom are minorities. So how do you think that helps in terms of some of the organizations like DEI efforts? Do you think it's easier to get some more progressive things going? I guess I just want to know your thoughts there.
Yeah. You know, the WNBA is certainly made up of mostly women of color, but there's still a lot of white men who are GMs, presidents in the C-suite. So that contributes to how we want to progress and how we represent ourselves, and ultimately affect change on our teams and in our league. But when it comes to us as a cohort of athletes, having the diversity that we represent in our league, it is incredibly inspiring to be working with women like those in the WNBA, because it's like you're learning something every single day. We keep each other on our toes. There's so much experience that we have individually that contributes to our collective being. And we're just hopeful that having that representation empowers others to understand why it's important to have diversity in your business, in your organization, because it exposes you to things that you may have otherwise thought were impossible to achieve. And I really love being a part of these women who work so hard in the W.
Awesome. Thank you.
We have another question from Jen. So Jen, if you want to go off mute, you can go ahead and ask that one.
Oh, wow, that's super washed out. Hello, Nneka. Thank you so much for your time. Yes, my name is Jin Yun. This has been incredible. I mean, you dropped a lot of gems. One that I'm going to be chewing on all week is, you said the highest form of self-love is discipline. That is like, ooh, that really hit me. And I'm just going to be thinking about that for a while. So thank you. I do have a couple of questions for you. One is a basketball related one, and one is more of like a community related one. I kind of call myself a community builder. So to hear you tell your story, and you're an excellent storyteller, by the way, but to kind of hear your story and the roles that you've played is, I've got a question related to that. So first, as it relates to the W, I wonder, if you had a welcome to the league moment, something that was like, oh God, this is not just college anymore,
It's a great question, Jen. Great question.
And then the second one is, you clearly wear a lot of hats as a player. Congratulations on W25, president and ambassador, making time for this. But in the center of all the roles that you play, what is the best compliment that somebody could give you?
Okay, yeah. No, I appreciate it. And I love, that's one of my favorite quotes, I'd have to say. I actually saw that in a tweet. I believe that the tweet was from, I want to say a West African woman. I have to get her name. But it's like been my favorite ever since. She kind of like consummated exactly like my thoughts. But I just wanted to give her credit, that's all. But a welcome to the league moment. Yeah, I would probably say that my welcome to the league moment was actually playing against the last president of the WNBPA. It was Tamika Catchings. Like I remember the first time I had to guard her, it was exhausting. It was just completely exhausting. She never sits still. I held my own, but she still had a great game. And then, out of everything that I've done in the league, I think that the biggest compliment that I get has to do with signing the recently signed collective bargaining agreement, because it was so monumental in its own way. And I just reflect, anytime someone brings it up, I just reflect on the amount of work it took for us to sign something so historical. And I'm just very grateful to have been a part of that, especially with the women that I worked with, my executive committee, our WNBPA staff, and of course the WNBA.
Right on. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question from CJ. But anyway, what's up, CJ? The question is, what does it feel like for amazing leaders and culture shifters like yourselves to unite on a platform like this? I can quickly chime in. I DM'd you, Nneka, and I was like, I don't even think she's gonna respond. And then you responded within like 2 minutes. So this was just like, this is really cool to have you. And we see you on TV and we're always like, oh, we know her, but it's cool to just see you again and to hear your perspective on everything like this. And we're very humbled to even have someone of your stature on this platform. So that's my perspective. And I'm sure Dee would kind of echo those thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and be like, I played basketball growing up, but I was nowhere as good. So you've always been, my role model, and to hear that you are like-minded in terms of like wanting to advance minorities, women of color, just hearing you talk on like imposter syndrome and just all these things that we like relate on. And it's just been so nice to have you on this platform. And I've learned a lot from this chat and hope we can kind of continue to collaborate on future events. So thank you again.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Such an excellent question. I'm always so I always feel empowered when anyone reaches out, seeking my thoughts, seeking my experience or wisdom or what have you. It's always a blessing, because I think as athletes too, you're so focused on results on the court, on the field, that you can't overlook other opportunities that sports kind of offers you. And so I'm really grateful to be able to have a platform that people care about, and hopefully my platform has inspired, united, and kind of spark some thought in any type of way. And I also really, of course, hope that what I've said today also represents Chesy. So I think it's always great. I always love to align with organizations that I believe in, and I'm just grateful that I've had the chance to talk to everybody.
Awesome. We'll wrap it up unless I see one more question and please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think it's Gamira. If you want to go
Jamira.
Thank you.
I have the same struggle with people who messing up my name, so I can relate to that. But thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really great. Nneka, I just wanted to get your opinion because I was an athlete myself, played basketball collegiately, and I just wanted to know, what was your mindset when you kind of had doubts about either getting to the WNBA? Was that always what you wanted to do? Did you have other aspirations outside of that? And then also to piggyback on that, what is some of your thoughts on the shut up and dribble type of situation in that conversation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when it comes to, I guess, me in the WNBA, I was not completely sold that I was going to play in the WNBA until halfway through my senior year. I was definitely preparing to enter a post-bac program to eventually go to medical school and become some type of doctor. It was the Nigerian in me. That was just kind of what it was. But I had a really successful senior year. And like I said, you have your core that really supports you. So my sister, she was telling me, hey, you're going to get drafted #1. This is an opportunity that you cannot miss. You can always go back to school. And I listened to her, and I just enjoyed my senior year, but I prepared to graduate early and ultimately got drafted. And it was, I haven't looked back since. It's been so amazing. And then, I'm sorry, your second question, that was about...
It was about shut up and dribble.
Dribble. Right.
Yeah.
So my argument, not really my argument, but my response to shut up and dribble is I wish we could. I really wish we could. In this world, I'm sure that we all wish we could just do what we love. But when you have a platform, however big or small you think it is, you have a duty. There's others that don't share privileges that you have that you may not think you have. And so I would be remiss as an athlete with a platform in an organization with a huge platform to just shut up and dribble. That's not what we're here to do. It's what we would love to do. I'm sure we would all love to just do what we love and not be bothered. But we exist in a world in which doing what we love is just simply not enough to be seen and to be heard. And so my argument to that is that I wish we could, but that's just not the reality. So if that's the case, I'm a dribble, and I'm also going to represent what I can.
Absolutely. Great responsibility. Thanks so much. I appreciate the call.
Okay, this will actually be the last question, I promise. This is from Ashaki. And again, I might also be mispronouncing your name, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But the question is, what advice do you have for women to exert leadership skills, but also be aware and kind of cognizant of the stereotype of the angry Black woman?
I say throw that stereotype away.
Period.
You just got to throw that stereotype away. As long as you're focusing on it, you're going to exude it in some way because you're embodying that stigma, and you don't want to be misinterpreted. We all understand decorum in different instances in our life, but that, I guess, cultural behavior as it exists now should not keep you from being who you need to be, especially in leadership. And I think when it comes to stigmas, one of the biggest stigmas is it kind of permeates the angry Black woman is that there's only one room at the table for one minority, and that's not true. That's just not true. You have to ensure that to get to the top, you can't do it by yourself. It takes empowering others. And when in a world in which, businesses are really focusing on DEI, we have to understand that that is not exclusive to the world that was built for certain individuals. You have to understand that you can also contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion, even if you are a part of that minority group. And a big issue with minorities when it comes to forward movement, I think, is crabs in a barrel. And we can't continue to do that. We have to link arms and move forward together. And that is where I find true leadership, is in empowerment.
Love it. Okay, so with that, we will wrap up. Nneka, again, thank you so much. This has been a blast, and I think everyone on this call would agree that we've all taken at least something away from this. For everyone that was able to attend, thank you so much. And we will be sharing out the recording, so feel free to pass it along to whoever you think would appreciate it. And then lastly, if you're working with within your company's DEI department, or you're involved with your company's DRGs, we'd love to kind of hear from you and just learn more about you and see if there's any way that we can collaborate and sponsor your groups. So again, my name is Toby Ogwumike. This is the wonderful Nneka Ogwumike here with the chat for us. And yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll end the call now.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nneka.